The waitress shielded a crying little girl and told the manager he could fire her before she let him throw the child out. He fired her on the spot. What she did not know was that the girl belonged to a mafia boss who owned the diner and remembered every debt paid to his family. By sunrise, a Blacktown car was waiting outside her apartment with an offer that would pull her into a world she never imagined. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, like the video, and comment where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories. And trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now, let's go back to hours before where it all started. The lunch rush at Garnet Street Diner arrived with its usual storm of noise. Plates clattered, coffee hissed on hot burners, and customers filled the red vinyl booths until the place hummed like a crowded train carriage. Vera Harvey moved between tables with the determined pace of someone who could not afford to slow down. Her white button-up was already smudged from the first wave of customers, and the loose strands around her ponytail tickled her cheek as she bent to refill a cup of tea. She had been here longer than she ever intended. 2 years running plates and wiping counters while a business degree gathered dust in a box at home. Every month, she promised herself she would polish her resume and try again, and every month the rent notice pushed that dream back another week. Antonio Crosby, the manager, rarely missed a chance to remind her that the diner could run without her. He had a sting in his voice that made each shift feel like a test she had already failed. Vera pushed those thoughts aside and focused on the rhythm of her work. She collected a stack of menus, turned toward the corner booths, and stopped short. A little girl sat alone at the far end of the diner. She looked 7 or 8 years old. Her long dark curls were pulled into pigtails tied with small pink ribbons. A pink floral dress peeked out beneath a neat white cardigan, but her posture was tight and stiff, hands clasped together in her lap, as if she were afraid of taking up too much space. She stared at the table with wide brown eyes that shimmered under the overhead lights. Vera softened her expression and walked over. "Hi there," she said, lowering her voice to something gentle. "Are you waiting for someone?" The girl gave a small nod. "All right. Would you like some water while you wait?" Another nod. Still silent. Vera filled a glass and set it in front of her. The girl wrapped both hands around it without drinking. Vera felt a tug in her chest. This was not ordinary shyness. This was fear, the kind that came from a place deeper than a simple separation from a parent. She stood beside the booth for a moment, debating whether to stay longer. Before she could speak again, a sharp voice cut through the room. "What is this?" Antonio stood several steps away, pale eyes already fixed on the child. His navy suit clung to his frame, and the red tie at his collar looked almost too bright for the room's soft lighting. He moved quickly, heels clicking across the floor with authority that demanded attention. Conversations in the nearest booths quieted. Vera stepped forward. "Antonio, she is waiting for someone. She is unaccompanied." His tone sharpened. "That means she should not be here." The girl's shoulders rose as if bracing for a blow. "She is not doing anything wrong," Vera said quietly. "She's taking up a table during peak hours," Antonio replied. "This is not a daycare. It is a business. If she is not ordering, she needs to leave." Vera looked at the girl, whose eyes were widening with panic. Her breath fluttered quickly, her hands gripping the edge of the seat. "She does not need to go anywhere," Vera said. "She is waiting for someone, and she is scared. Let her sit until they arrive. I will pay for whatever she orders." "I did not ask you to pay," Antonio shot back. "I asked you to follow instructions." The tension in the diner sharpened. A few customers pretended not to listen, but their glances slid in the direction of the booth. "She's a child, Antonio," Vera said firmly. "You're asking me to push a crying kid out onto the street during the lunch rush. That is not something I am doing." Antonio's jaw twitched. He took a step closer, lowering his voice even though the entire diner could hear him. "Move out of the way, Vera." "No, this is not up for discussion." "If you want her gone," Vera said, placing one protective arm around the girl's trembling shoulders, "you will have to fire me first." Antonio opened his mouth, ready to snap back, when another voice cut across the room. "Or what?" The two words were quiet, but they carried through the diner like a sudden drop in air pressure. A slow stillness descended. Someone set a fork down too hard. Someone else inhaled sharply. Vera turned. A tall man stood at the far end of the counter. His hair was dark and slicked back, a single wave falling neatly behind his ear. His face was sharply cut, clean-shaven, with a controlled stillness that suggested he rarely raised his voice. He wore a dark pinstripe three-piece suit, the fabric smooth against his tan skin, and a deep red tie that matched the soft gleam of the gold ring on his finger. A black fedora rested on the counter beside him. Two men in dark suits stood near the entrance, silent and unmoving. Antonio's face went pale. "Sir, I did not realize you were here," he stammered. "I did not know." The man walked toward the booth with a steady, measured pace. He did not look at Antonio. His attention was fixed entirely on the child. When he reached the table, he crouched beside the girl and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "She is with me," he said. A whisper moved through the diner. Recognition, fear, deference. The girl looked up at him, but she did not move toward him. Her chin trembled again, and she slid closer to Vera, pressing her cheek against the waitress's arm as if Vera were the only safe place in the entire room. The man studied the child's reaction, and something troubled flickered across his expression. Antonio swallowed hard. "Sir, if I had known she belonged to you, I would have—" "Would have what?" the man asked. His tone stayed calm, but there was an edge underneath, a hint of something cold. "Treated her like a human being only because you recognized her father?" "No, sir. That is not what I meant." The man stood and finally looked at Vera. His gaze was sharp but not unkind. She felt a tightness in her stomach and did her best not to look away. "You stepped in for her," he said. It was not a question. "Yes," Vera said. She was frightened. He held her gaze for several long seconds. The small, loose strand around her face, the shake in her hands, the firm way she held the child, all of it seemed to register. He gave a slow nod before turning to Antonio. "Apologize," he said, "to her and to my daughter." Antonio's face flushed with humiliation. The apology he forced out was stiff and shallow. Vera barely had time to register it before he grabbed her elbow and hissed, "Back room. Now." He dragged her through the swinging door into the narrow hallway between the supply closet and the office. "You embarrass me in front of the entire diner," he said in a low voice. "You undermine my authority." "I protected a child," Vera replied. "You are fired," he said, snatching the apron from her hands. "Collect your things and leave." Her chest tightened. She looked through the small window in the hall door. The girl was crying again. The man in the pinstripe suit had placed a hand on her back, but his eyes were fixed on the hallway where Vera stood. 10 minutes later, Vera stepped out the rear door with a cardboard box pressed to her stomach. The cold air hit her face. She paused, staring at the pavement, trying not to cry. She had expected anger or fear to rise in her, but instead there was only a tired ache. She wondered how she would pay her rent now, and how long her savings would hold. She turned back once. Through the side window, the girl was still watching her, small hands pressed against the glass. Behind her, the tall man stood at the office doorway, his jaw tight as he replayed the confrontation in his mind. He had seen every second, and Vera had no idea that she had just changed the direction of all three of their lives. The next morning arrived slow and heavy. Light pushed through the single curtain in Vera's cramped apartment, warming the tangled blanket around her legs. She lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling, replaying the scene from the diner as if her mind refused to let it fade. The tension in Antonio's voice, the tremble in the little girl's shoulders, the steady presence of the man in the pinstripe suit. Her chest tightened again with a mix of pride and fear. She had done the right thing. She knew that, but right and practical rarely walk together. Rent was due in 5 days. Her savings account held barely enough to cover groceries. Getting fired meant losing her tips, losing her routine, and losing the last sliver of stability she had been holding on to. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. Dozens of missed notifications flashed across the cracked screen. Most were from coworkers. One message stood out, a short video clip and a shaking caption beneath it that read, "Vera, you are all over the staff chat." She tapped to open it. The recording was grainy, taken from someone's phone near the counter. It captured the moment she stepped between Antonio and the booth her arm around the child, Antonio pointing, and then the quiet voice that had silenced the room. The angle only caught part of the man's face, but his presence was unmistakable. The clip ended with Leah pressing herself into Vera's side. Her stomach sank. She had not expected anyone to record it, much less share it. A knock sounded at her door. She froze, but it was only her landlord sliding a note under the frame. She waited until the hall grew quiet, then picked it up. In tidy handwriting, he had written, "Rent reminder. Please update me soon." Vera pressed the note against her forehead and closed her eyes. She needed work quickly. She brewed a weak cup of instant coffee, sat at her small table, and pulled up job listings on her phone. Most required experience she did not have, or paid far less than the diner. A few asked for a degree like hers, but she had learned the hard way that promised interviews rarely led anywhere. It felt like the world kept telling her she was qualified in theory, but not useful in practice. She called her mother on a video app. When the screen blinked to life, her mother smiled brightly. "Good morning, sweetheart. Long night at work?" Vera hesitated. "Something like that. Are you eating? You look tired." "I am fine, Mom. Everything is fine." The lie slid out too easily. "How are you?" Her mother began talking about errands and neighborhood gossip. Vera listened, smiled when required, and said nothing about losing her job or the girl in the booth. She knew her mother would worry too much. When the call ended, she felt the weight of her silence as much as the weight of her situation. Across the city, Alvaro Galvin stood in the quiet of his office, watching the same diner footage from a different angle. The large screen displayed a clearer view than any phone camera. He watched Leah shrink into the booth. He watched Vera step forward. He watched Antonio reach for the girl's arm, and Vera pull her away with a steadiness that surprised him. He watched Leah seek shelter behind stranger. His security chief, Raul, stood nearby. "It looks worse from this camera angle," Raul said. "Crosby should have handled it better, but the waitress escalated it too." Alvaro continued watching the screen. "She escalated nothing," he said. "She protected my child." Raul folded his arms. "It is done now. Crosby fired her. People overreact in these jobs." Alvaro finally turned. His eyes were calm, but his tone held no softness. "The eye behind someone she did not know. Not behind me." Raul said nothing. Alvaro shut off the screen. For a moment the room was silent, except for the faint hum of the air conditioner. He looked toward the framed photograph near his desk. His daughter, hair loose, smiling in a way she had not smiled in months. That photo had been taken before the night everything shattered their family. Before she had learned that safety could disappear in a heartbeat. He could still hear Leah's small voice the night she told him she did not want to leave the house anymore. He could still see her flinch when a door closed too loudly. For all his authority, for all the men who stood ready to protect her, he had not been able to stop her from breaking inside. Now a stranger had stepped between Leah and fear without hesitation. That was not something he intended to ignore. Later that evening, Leah refused to eat her dinner. She pushed her plate away and sat with her fingers curled in the hem of her cardigan. "Dad," she whispered, "will the waitress be in trouble because of me?" The question pierced him. "No," he said. "She will not be. She was nice," Leah said softly. "She talked to me like I matter. She did not look at me like I was a problem." "She is not in trouble," he repeated. "I will fix it." Leah looked up, searching his face for proof. When she nodded and finally ate a few bites, he felt both relief and something sharper beneath it. He needed to know more about this woman who had eased his daughter's fear with a single act of courage. He returned to his office that night and requested her file from the diner's HR system. Her name, Vera Harvey, appeared at the top. A degree in business administration. Excellent performance notes. 0 write-ups. A record that spoke of steadiness and long hours. Her only flaw seemed to be that she did not know how to back down from what she believed was right. He closed the file and made his decision. Vera was not going to suffer for defending his daughter. Not while he had the power to change her fate. The next morning, Vera sat at her kitchen table wearing old sweatpants and a stretched t-shirt. The remains of a cereal bowl sat beside a pile of printed job applications. She had circled several positions, none of which excited her. She rubbed her eyes and wondered how many days she could by herself before the bills caught up. Outside, the quiet street stirred awake. A few neighbors passed by on their way to work. A delivery truck rumbled near the corner. Vera tried to focus on rewriting her resume for the 100th time. Then she heard the deep idle of an engine. A black town car eased to a stop directly in front of her building. The vehicle gleamed in the morning light. For a moment, she wondered if it was for a neighbor. Few people in this area saw cars that polished. A knock sounded at her door. Vera hesitated, heart lifting painfully. She opened it slowly. A driver in a dark suit stood in the hall, hands folded respectfully. He looked as if nothing could shake his posture. "Miss Harvey," he said. "Yes," she answered cautiously. He reached inside his jacket and handed her an embossed envelope. "This is for you." Vera accepted it, confused. Before she could ask anything, he nodded politely and stepped back toward the stairs. She closed the door and stared at the envelope. Her name was written on the front in clean, dark ink. Her fingers trembled as she broke the seal. Inside was a formal letter on thick paper. The letterhead read, Galvin Group. Her breath caught as she began to read. Position, Internal Compliance and Loss Prevention Officer. Division, Restaurant and Hospitality Holdings. Compensation, $130,000 per year with benefits. Her mouth went dry. She kept reading. Your education has been overlooked. Your integrity has not. If you choose this position, you will report directly to me. You defended my child without knowing who she was. I need people who act with honesty even when it costs them. There is one condition. You tell me the truth, always. At the bottom, in a steady hand, was the signature she recognized. Alvaro Galvin. Vera sat down slowly, the letter limp in her hands. The room felt too small, her thoughts too large. She looked around at the half-empty cereal bowl, the pile of rejected job listings, the rent reminder pinned to the fridge. Nothing in her life had prepared her for this. She walked to the window. The town car waited at the curb, quiet and patient, as if it had all the time in the world. Vera placed a hand on the glass. Her reflection stared back at her, tired but still standing. The same instinct that pushed her to shield a terrified child rose again, quiet and steady. She turned toward the door. Whatever waited outside, she would face it with that same stubborn courage. The ride to Galvin Group headquarters felt unreal. Vera sat in the back of the town car in her best second-hand suit, smoothing the fabric again and again. Her stomach tightened as the city rolled past the window. She tried to steady her breathing, reminding herself that she had walked into more chaotic lunch rushes than she could count. If she could face Antonio on the busiest afternoon of the week, she could walk into a corporate building without shaking apart. The car pulled to a stop in front of a tall glass tower. The entrance alone was imposing, framed by marble pillars and two polished bronze doors. People in tailored suits moved briskly through the lobby. Security guards stood to the side with expressions that missed nothing. Vera forced her feet to move. Inside, the lobby gleamed with pale stone floors and a high ceiling that reflected every sound. A receptionist greeted her with a nod and directed her to a bank of elevators. As she crossed the space, she noticed something subtle. A man in a navy suit paused when he saw the driver escort her inside. A woman by the front desk straightened her posture. Even the guards watched her with a different kind of focus. It was not respect for her. It was recognition of who she must be meeting. Alvaro Galvin inspired a certain quiet caution everywhere he walked, even when he was not present. Vera stepped into the elevator. Her reflection stared back at her from the mirrored walls. She adjusted her ponytail and tried to imagine she belonged here. The doors opened on the top floor. A long hallway stretched ahead, lined with framed photographs of restaurants, grand openings, and awards. At the end, a door stood slightly ajar. Raul, the security chief, met her first. He offered a short nod. "Miss Harvey, this way." His voice held no warmth but no hostility either. Just simple acknowledgement. He led her into a private office where Alvaro stood by the window, looking out over the city. He turned when she entered. "Vera," he said. "Sit." She obeyed, though her pulse quickened. The office was large and quiet, decorated with dark shelves and a long walnut desk. Sunlight caught the gold ring on his hand and the watch at his wrist. He studied her for a moment before speaking again. Why did you defy Crosby that day? There was no accusation in his tone, only curiosity. Vera folded her hands in her lap. She was a child. She was scared. No child deserves to be dragged out like trash because an adult wants to impress someone. Alvaro held her gaze. His expression softened almost imperceptibly. Good. I needed to hear that from you. She waited, unsure if she should say more. He stepped behind his desk. Your job begins today. You will review our restaurants and hospitality accounts. You will find what others want hidden. That is your role. If you uncover something that makes people uncomfortable, you will not be punished for it. Not by me. A small weight lifted from her chest. She nodded. Raul stepped forward then, introducing himself more formally. Beside him stood a tall man with square glasses and a calm manner. This is Mr. Delgado, Raul said. Finance director. You will coordinate with him. Delgado gave a polite smile. Welcome aboard. Vera thanked them, her nerves easing slightly. Alvaro closed a folder on his desk. One more thing, he said. Crosby has been reassigned. Vera did not ask where. She suspected she did not want to know. That evening, she received an unexpected invitation. A car took her to one of the flagship restaurants atop a high-rise building. Soft lighting glowed through tall windows overlooking the skyline. A private table waited near the corner. Leah sat there, hands folded neatly, posture tense. When she saw Vera, her shoulders lifted with a hint of relief. Alvaro rose from his seat as Vera approached. Thank you for joining us, he said. Vera slid into the chair across from Leah. Thank you for inviting me. For a while, the girl said nothing. She picked at a piece of bread, her eyes drifting between her father and Vera. When the waiter placed water glasses on the table, Vera leaned slightly toward Leah. Do you know how to make a napkin flower? Vera asked. Leah blinked. No. Vera took her napkin, folded it carefully, and twisted it into a simple shape. My grandmother taught me this when I was little. I used to make them during long dinners because it kept me from thinking about how bored I was. A small, almost shy smile touched Leah's face. She tried to fold herself, fumbling once before Vera gently guided her fingers. When she finally shaped it correctly, she lifted it with pride. Alvaro watched the moment quietly, his expression unreadable but no longer cold. Later, over soft slices of roasted chicken and vegetables, Leah began asking quiet questions. What did Vera study? Did she like working in restaurants? Was she afraid when Antonio yelled? Vera answered carefully but honestly. Leah listened with a focused seriousness far beyond her age. Halfway through the meal, Leah said in a small voice, Sometimes I have nightmares about people leaving and not coming back. Alvaro's fork paused halfway to his mouth. A shadow crossed his face. Vera spoke gently. I used to have nightmares too. They feel real while they last, but they are only thoughts trying to scare you. They do not decide what happens in the morning. Leah nodded, comforted. Alvaro said nothing, but the tightness in his jaw revealed more than words would have. The next day, work began in earnest. Vera was given access to the digital ledgers for every diner, bar, and kitchen under Galvin Group. The interface was neat, organized, and overwhelming in scale. She sat at her assigned desk with a notebook open, ready to dive in. It did not take long for something to stand out. The diner that had fired her recorded unusually high orders for meat, seafood, and liquor. The sales figures did not match the stock numbers. The pattern repeated across several months. She circled the figures in her notebook. A few hours later, she ran into a senior manager from the diner division. He approached with a practiced smile. You must be the new compliance officer, he said. Welcome. Thank you, she replied. He leaned slightly, lowering his voice. A word of advice. People here work hard. Numbers can look odd when you are new. Do not dig too fast. The last person who pressed too hard chose to move on. Vera felt the warning beneath the politeness. He walked away before she could answer. She returned to her desk with a heavier heart. She had seen this kind of pressure before. It was the same tone Antonio had used to remind staff of their place. Only here, the stakes were much higher. That evening, after most of the office emptied, Vera stayed behind. The glow of her monitor lit the dim space around her. She opened the ledgers again, scrolling through deliveries, invoices, and logs. There were consistent discrepancies. Orders too large for the recorded sales. Deliveries recorded at unusual hours. Missing entries that should have been routine. She pushed her chair back and rubbed her temples. The pattern was too deliberate to be simple error. The last row of numbers on the screen made her pause again. The diner stock flow looked less like carelessness and more like a gateway. Something was moving through that place. Something untracked. A quiet chill moved through her. This was not about a few stolen steaks or a padded invoice. The inconsistencies were too frequent, too bold. She stared at the screen and realized she was holding the thread of something bigger than she had expected. Something that had been happening long before she ever wrapped her arm around a frightened little girl. And now she was inside the world that wanted it kept quiet. Over the next few days, Vera built the pattern piece by piece. Her desk disappeared under printouts and hand-drawn charts. She circled vendor names that appeared too often. She highlighted delivery times that made no sense for a diner that closed at midnight. When she compared order quantities to actual seating capacity, the discrepancies widened. Even accounting for busy weekends and special events, nothing explained the inflated numbers. The more she uncovered, the more her nerves tightened. It felt as if she were teasing out the threads of a web someone had spent years weaving. By midweek, she decided she needed to visit the old diner in person. Officially, she went as a compliance inspector. Unofficially, she went to see how people behaved when they thought she no longer belonged there. The moment she walked through the door, conversations dipped. Some staff members greeted her politely. Others froze or exchanged glances. A few avoided her entirely. The air felt different, not hostile, but tense, as if people were waiting to see whether she would cause trouble. The new manager, a man she had met only once, gave a stiff smile. "Good to have you here," he said, though his eyes slid away quickly. Vera walked through the kitchen, clipboard in hand. Everything looked clean, but the kitchen staff avoided her questions. She checked inventory sheets, matched them to shelves, and took note of items that seemed to appear in strange quantities. A tray of seal boxes sat near the back door. No labels. No entry in the log. Those came late last night. One cook muttered before turning away. "Late?" she asked. "How late?" He shrugged without meeting her eye. "After hours." Back in the office that afternoon, she requested the security footage from several locations, including the diner. Raoul approved her access without hesitation. She spent the evening reviewing recordings, letting them play at double speed while she watched for anything unusual. She found it. Several nights in a row, just after closing, unmarked trucks backed up to the rear door. Men unloaded crates quickly. No one scanned them into the system. No paperwork. No timestamps. The trucks pulled away minutes later. Vera sat back in her chair and felt a faint chill rise along her spine. Whoever orchestrated this was confident. This was not sloppy theft. It was a routine, a practice system. She saved the footage, labeled it, and tried to steady her pulse. Her days at headquarters were heavy with numbers and unease. But her evenings were increasingly spent with Leah. Alvaro often worked late, so Vera found herself seated with the girl at a quiet table in the upstairs dining room or in a lounge decorated with soft lamps. Homework first, then small conversations. Leah relaxed more easily around her now. She asked about Vera's childhood, her favorite cartoons, her least favorite vegetables. She asked shy questions about bravery, though she never called it that. Instead, she asked why Vera had stepped in that day, why she did not walk away. One night, as Vera packed up math worksheets, Leah's voice dropped to a whisper. "You won't disappear too, will you?" Vera paused. The fear in the question was raw and familiar. She knelt beside her. "I'm not going anywhere without saying goodbye," she said. "Not ever." It was the most she could promise. But it eased something in Leah's small shoulders. The next morning, danger showed itself in quieter ways. On her way to the stairwell, a kitchen worker from one of the satellite locations stopped her. He checked both ends of the hall before speaking. "Be careful what you ask," he said in a low voice. "Things have always gone on after hours. People who push too hard do not stay long." Vera swallowed. "What kind of things?" He shook his head quickly. "Not for me to say. But watch your back. Then he walked away before she could press further. Later that afternoon, as she prepared another batch of comparison charts, her phone buzzed. A number she did not recognize had sent a message. "Mind your own business." She stared at the words, her pulse tightening. No signature, no context, only the cold warning. She slipped the phone into her desk drawer and forced herself to continue working. Fear was exactly what someone wanted from her. She refused to give them that. By the next day, she had accumulated enough information to prepare a preliminary report. She organized the charts and tables into a single folder and requested a meeting with Alvaro. Raul escorted her to the office. Alvaro sat behind his desk, reviewing documents. His expression was neutral, though she sensed the weight of the last few days lingering behind his eyes. "Show me what you have," he said. Vera opened the folder and laid out the pages. "I have not tied anything to a specific individual yet," she began. "But these are recurring patterns across multiple locations. Deliveries at odd hours. Inventory that never reaches the floor. Money flowing into account names that look suspicious when compared across sites." She moved through each page with calm precision. Her hands only trembled once. Alvaro listened without interrupting. He studied the charts, the highlighted rows, the video stills she printed from the security footage. His expression darkened slowly, not with anger toward her, but with the controlled tension of a man recognizing betrayal. "Someone is using my locations," he said quietly. "They're moving product and cash through my own buildings." Vera nodded. "It looks systematic." He exhaled slowly. "Find out who." A knock sounded at the door then. Raul stepped in. "Crosby is here for his annual review." Vera stiffened. Alvaro glanced at her. "Do you want to stay or step out?" "I'll go," she said quickly. She gathered her folder, but when she stepped into the hallway, Antonio was already walking toward her. His shoes clicked sharply against the tile. His expression twisted into a thin smile. "Well," he said, "look at you. I always knew you were too clever for the apron." She held her ground. "Excuse me." He leaned slightly toward her. "You think a change in wardrobe puts you above anyone? You will learn how things work here." He brushed past her with a laugh that carried more bitterness than humor. Vera watched him disappear into Alvaro's office. Her hand tightened around her folder. She knew he had recognized the danger. She knew he understood exactly what her new role meant. And now he had reason to see her as a threat. She returned to her desk with her pulse still unsteady. The anonymous message. The cook's warning. Antonio's stare. It all connected to the same shadow that hung over the diner and every ledger she opened. That evening, before she left, Alvaro called her back to his office. Raul stood with him. "I have looked over your findings again," Alvaro said. "You were careful. You did not jump to conclusions. That is good." He closed the folder and tapped it lightly. "I want you to keep digging. Raul will support you quietly. You will not investigate alone." The decision felt heavy and final. Vera nodded. "I understand." As she stepped out of the office, she felt the full truth settle in her chest. She was no longer simply reviewing numbers. She was challenging people who had built their security on these hidden streams of money. People who would not let go without a fight. The elevator doors closed in front of her. For the first time, she understood just how dangerous the truth could be, and she walked toward it anyway. The next morning, Vera met Raul in a small conference room on the top floor. The windows had been covered with blinds, and a long whiteboard stretched across one wall. Raul placed a stack of markers on the table and nodded toward the space as though inviting her to reshape it. "We need a full picture," he said. "Start wherever you think the line begins." Vera unrolled her charts and pinned them to the wall. Delivery logs, vendor lists, timestamps, cross-reference spreadsheets. Raul added security stills and transport records from other restaurants. Soon the board looked like a growing map of quiet corruption. Lines connected locations. Names repeated. The same suppliers circle back around. Every red circle landed on a property once supervised by Antonio, even if only briefly. Raul stood with his arms crossed. He knew the system well enough to abuse it, but he is not working alone. They kept adding details until the entire wall pulsed with patterns. It felt like a war room, a place where truth was stripped from shadows and made plain. By late afternoon, she stepped back and took in the full map. The same sequence of irregularities repeated at 6 locations, all tied to Antonio's operations. Raul exhaled slowly. "You have a good eye, Vera." She nodded, though a knot tightened inside her. Every step forward pulled her deeper into a world that punished curiosity. That evening, Alvaro invited her to join him for coffee in a quiet corner of one of the flagship restaurants. The dining room was dim, the last few customers settling their bills. Lamps cast soft light over the table as he stirred a small cup of espresso. "You are working very late," he said. "So are you," she answered. He gave a faint smile before turning serious. "My family built power in this city through restaurants and hospitality. People assume it was all muscle and intimidation, but most of it came from building networks. Places where business happened away from official eyes." He tapped a fingertip lightly on the table. "There's always been a balance. Some activity kept certain people loyal. It was easier to look the other way as long as they stayed within limits. And now they are not," she said. "No," he replied. "Now someone is feeding information to rivals. Someone is taking far more than their share." A silence settled between them, filled with quiet understanding. She saw the weight of it on his shoulders. Power could protect, but it also trapped. When she returned to headquarters, she heard laughter echo down the hall. Leah stood in Alvaro's office doorway, talking animatedly to one of the house staff. She caught sight of Vera and brightened instantly. "Vera," she said, rushing over. "Guess what I drew today?" She held up a small sketchbook. Vera knelt and flipped through the pages. Leah had drawn 3 figures at a diner table. One small child, one woman with a ponytail, and a tall man in a suit. The 3 were smiling. "You made this?" Vera asked softly. Leah nodded. "It's us." Alvaro watched from his desk. There was a softness in his expression that was new. Not the guarded calm he wore for the world, but something closer to hope. Later, a therapist pulled Alvaro aside. Vera overheard only part of the conversation. "Whoever this new woman is, Leah trusts her," the therapist said. "That is not something she does easily." Vera felt her chest tighten. She had stepped into these people's lives without planning to. Now, she mattered to a child who had known too much fear. But the rest of the world did not soften around that bond. The next day, pressure appeared in subtle but unmistakable ways. Raul walked into her office with a grim look. "One of our bars had a drive-by last night," he said. "No one was hurt. But it was a message. A message from who? Someone who knows we're closing in on the wrong people." Later in the afternoon, a health inspection arrived at one of the key locations. No warning, no appointment. It was the kind of inspection that came only when someone pushed the right buttons in City Hall. Raul returned after checking the scene. "Someone inside is feeding them schedules and routes," he said. "Someone knows exactly where you are digging." Vera tried to steady her breathing as she updated her reports. She had expected resistance, but this was something else. This was the quiet hostility of a world protecting itself. She felt it again during the next manager's meeting. She sat beside Raul while presenting summary figures that appeared harmless at first glance. She saw the shift in the room. Managers stiffened. A few leaned back in their chairs with forced calm. Others avoided her eyes entirely. They understood that she had access to everything now. Antonio sat in the back with his arms folded. His face held the tight, controlled expression of a man calculating 10 steps ahead. Vera kept her eyes on the charts, refusing to acknowledge him. When the meeting ended, she caught him watching her leave. No hostility, no smile. Only cold recognition. He knew she was closing in. Late that night, the office emptied out one room at a time. Alvaro stood alone by his window when Vera passed his open door. The city lights cast a faint shimmer along his suit. He did not notice her at first. He seemed deep in thought. She hesitated, unsure if she should disturb him. He turned slightly, sensing her presence. "Is something wrong?" she asked. He shook his head. "I was thinking about choice." She stepped into the room. "Choice? When I brought you into this office," he said, "I believe it would make us stronger. But now I find myself wondering whether I expose you to something you cannot walk away from." "You did not force me," she said quietly. "I chose to stay." He looked at her then, really looked. Not as an employer studying an employee, but as a man weighing the consequences of trust. You changed something in this household, he said. Liao looks at you as though you are a part of her world. I cannot take that away from her. And I cannot ignore the fact that you are finding things I was blind to. Vera felt a faint warmth rise in her chest and tried to keep her voice steady. Then trust me to finish. He nodded and turned back to the window. I do. She left his office, feeling the quiet shift between them, a line drawn in understanding rather than fear. But the moment did not lighten the danger outside those walls. The next morning, she returned to the conference room and studied the war room again. The patterns she had mapped were tightening like a net. The same transactions, the same vendors, the same suspicious account names. She spent hours combing through invoices. Many were ordinary. Some were altered. A few contained tiny errors that only someone who worked the system for years would overlook. But 3 invoices stopped her completely. They had been printed from a location that matched Antonio's old office. The signatures were forged, but the format was identical to his usual style. The destination was a shell company she had never seen before. A quick search revealed it was partially owned by a relative of Antonio, hidden behind layers of paperwork. She stared at the documents, her pulse rising. This was not a loose connection. This was a direct line. She laid the papers on the table, her fingers trembling slightly. The trail she had been following for weeks had circled back to the one person who had fired her without remorse. She understood then that her investigation was no longer brushing the edge of trouble. It was heading straight into the center of it. Across the city, in a dim bar tucked behind a row of shuttered shops, Antonio sat in a corner booth with 2 men from the back office. The place smelled of old beer and wood polish, the kind of room that kept secrets by choice. Antonio leaned forward, lowering his voice. She's getting too close, he said. If she keeps pulling at those threads, we are all finished. One of the men glanced toward the bar counter. The boss trusts her. He listens when she speaks. That is exactly why she has to go, Antonio replied. We cannot shut her down cleanly, but we can redirect the blame. They exchanged uneasy looks. Antonio's eyes hardened. We make her the leak, he said. Emails, spreadsheets, routing numbers. Enough to push suspicion in her direction. When he sees her as the problem, he will remove her for us. The men nodded slowly, understanding what it meant to cross that line. They opened their laptops and began creating a trail built on lies. Messages were typed in Vera's name. Old files were copied and edited. Money was rerouted briefly into an account that used her initials. Every detail was designed to look authentic. Every timestamp matched a moment when she was logged out. By the time they closed their screens, a digital trap had taken shape. The next morning, the shift in the air was immediate. Vera stepped out of the elevator and noticed people falling silent. Conversations ended the moment she passed. I slid away. Even the receptionist avoided meeting her gaze. 2 security guards waited near the turnstiles. Ms. Harvey, one asked. Yes. You were wanted upstairs. They flanked her as she walked. No one said what it was about. No one had to. A knot tightened in her stomach as they approached Alvaro's office. The doors opened. The blinds were half drawn, letting a muted light spill across the room. Alvaro sat behind his desk, his posture rigid. Raul stood nearby, his expression unreadable. On the desk lay a stack of printouts and a small flash drive. Sit, Alvaro said quietly. Vera sat slowly, forcing her hands to stay still. Raul placed the printouts in front of her. These files were recovered last night, he said. Emails, transaction logs, account transfers. They appear to show communication between you and a rival group. Her breath stalled. What? She whispered. Alvaro's gaze was sharp. According to these records, you have been passing internal numbers to people outside the company. That is not true, she said, her voice low. I have never contacted anyone outside this building. Alvaro watched her closely, then explained the files. She scanned the first page. The email address looked like hers. The formatting matched, but the phrasing was wrong. Too stiff, too formal. She flipped to the next page. A spreadsheet showing money funneled into an account that used her initials. Then another, and another. A cold anger pushed through her shock. "This is fake," she said. "Prove it," Alvaro answered, voice even. She took a breath, steadying herself. "This timestamp," she said, pointing. "I was with Leah at her therapy session. Your staff recorded the entire hour because she had a breakthrough. I could not have sent anything." Raul checked the log on his tablet. A slow nod followed. "She is right. She was there." She moved to another page. "And this phrasing. I never talk like this. Look at the sentence structure. Whoever wrote this does not know how I speak." Alvaro's expression shifted slightly, but he said nothing. She turned another printout. "This number sequence. Only someone who worked under Antonio for years would know how to code it. I had no access to that system until a few weeks ago." Silence hung in the room. For a moment, she feared the evidence would still win. She feared he would choose the documents over her word. The idea made her heart pound. A soft sound broke the tension. A small voice outside the door. "Papa!" "Leah!" Vera froze. The handle jiggled. Raul stepped quickly toward the door and blocked it. Leah's voice tightened with worry. "Where is she? Why is she shouting? Is she leaving?" Her words cut straight through the room. Vera swallowed hard. The last thing she wanted was for the child to hear any of this. Alvaro closed his eyes briefly. A quiet ache crossed his face. "Tell her to wait," he said. Raul spoke gently through the door. Leah protested, fear rising in her tone. Vera felt it like a weight pressing down on her chest. That fear was familiar. Something had taught Leah to expect loss. When the room fell quiet again, Raul returned to the desk and connected the flash drive to the system. He typed quickly, pulling up the back-end logs. His brow furrowed. "These files were edited from a terminal in the old office wing," he said. A terminal still registered under Antonio's access. Vera closed her eyes for a moment, relief and exhaustion mixing. She opened them again to find Alvaro staring at the screen, anger rising behind his calm. "Run the full trace," he said. Raul's fingers flew across the keys. A moment later, he looked up. The alterations were done on the same night Vera was accounted for off-site. Everything points back to Antonio. The room went still. Alvaro leaned back slowly. His jaw tightened. A muscle in his cheek twitched. For the first time since she walked in, something like guilt crossed his face. He stood without a word, lifted the stack of forged papers, and placed them in a metal tray beside his desk. He took out a lighter and clicked it. A small flame appeared. He held it to the corner of the top page. The fire caught quickly, curling the edges of the paper as it burned. The ash darkened, rising in a thin trail. Vera watched the flames devour the lies that had almost destroyed her life. Alvaro set the tray down and turned toward her. "I should have trusted you," he said quietly. The words sounded heavy, as if he wasn't used to saying them. "You were brought here because you speak the truth even when it is difficult. I nearly forgot that." She let out a slow breath. "If you ever doubt me again without checking, I will walk away. No matter how much I care about Leah." He met her eyes. "You deserve that promise." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The room felt different now, stripped of accusation, but still charged with the weight of what almost happened. Finally, he nodded toward the burnt scraps. "This will not happen again." She stood. Her hands trembled, but her voice stayed steady. "Then we moved forward." He looked at Raul. "Prepare everything for the manager's meeting. No warnings. No agenda sent ahead." Raul nodded. "Understood." "And Vera," Alvaro added, turning back to her. "You will present the findings. You uncovered the truth. You should be the one to speak it." The idea made her pulse quicken, but she nodded. When she stepped out into the hallway, Leah was waiting on the floor with her arms wrapped around her knees. The moment she saw Vera, she jumped to her feet and ran straight into her arms. "Are you staying?" she whispered. Vera hugged her tightly. "I am not going anywhere." Leah buried her face against her shoulder, finally relaxing. As Vera held her, she felt the last of the fear drain from her body. The danger had not passed, but she was still standing, and the people who tried to frame her had just made their biggest mistake. The truth had survived, and soon, the entire room of managers would hear it. The next days turned into a slow, careful march toward confrontation. Vera and Raul transformed the war room from a wall of questions into a structured case. Charts were rearranged into clean sequences. Timelines were written in thick marker. Each arrow now had a direction and a destination. They started with missing stock. Vera created a series of simple graphs that even the least patient manager could follow. Red bars marked what had been ordered. Blue bars marked what had been sold. The gaps glowed like open wounds. Next came the shell companies. Raul pulled official documents while Vera traced ownership through layers of paperwork. A pattern emerged. The same names. The same post office boxes. The same quiet transfers that had been ignored for too long. They did not stop at numbers. They called in staff from the affected locations. At first, people were reluctant. Years of working in a system that punished questions had taught them to keep their heads down. But Raul stood beside Vera during each conversation, and his presence carried weight. "We can protect you," he said more than once. "This is not a trap for you. The trap is for the ones who used you." Slowly, people started talking. A bartender admitted he was told to keep a separate ledger on certain nights. A cook described being ordered to load boxes into unmarked vans after closing. A driver confessed that he was paid extra to make deliveries that never passed through official channels. Vera wrote everything down. Some statements were messy and emotional. Others were cold and factual. Together, they formed a picture that could not be brushed aside as misunderstanding. Meanwhile, Alvaro worked on another front. He called Antonio and the other senior managers, informing them of a scheduled performance review. The tone was casual, routine, the kind of meeting held every year to discuss profits, losses, and future plans. Antonio accepted the invitation with the guarded ease of a man who believed he was still in control. What he did not know was that the real presentation, the one that bound all the evidence together, was being prepared quietly with no agenda sent in advance. While the trap took shape, Leah's world continued to shift in small, hopeful ways. Therapy sessions became less tense. Leah spoke more. She drew pictures of herself, Vera, and Alvaro sitting at a diner table, sometimes with a plate of pancakes between them, sometimes with a little sign over the door that read safe. Her lines were still careful, but the colors were brighter. One afternoon, after a session, Leah sat with Vera in a quiet lounge, legs tucked under her on the couch. "Can bad people change?" Leah asked suddenly. The question hung in the air like a weight. Vera thought carefully. "Some can," she answered, "if they decide to stop doing harm and work to fix what they broke. But some choose not to, and they do not change at all." Leah frowned slightly. "How do you know which is which?" "You watch what they do," Vera said. "Not just what they say." Leah considered this, then nodded slowly. It was not a simple answer, but it was an honest one. That honesty was slowly reshaping things inside Alvaro as well. One evening, after a long day of sorting reports and witness statements, he invited Vera to share a late meal in his office. The city lights cast a soft glow through the half-open blinds. A simple spread of pasta and salad sat on the small table by the window. They ate in tired silence for a while. Eventually, Alvaro set his fork down. "You should know something about how we ended up here," he said. Vera looked at him, waiting. "Leah's mother did not like this life," he continued. "She tolerated it as long as she believed I could keep the danger at the edges. Away from the house. Away from our child." He stared out at the city, eyes shadowed. "I told myself I could control everything, that the violence would never touch them. I was wrong. A deal went bad. A message was sent. She died because people wanted to prove they could reach me whenever they wished." Vera's chest tightened. "I am sorry," she said quietly. "So am I," he replied. "Sorry for believing I could stand in both worlds without consequence." Leah saw more than any child should. After that, she stopped talking, stopped trusting. "I tried to remove the worst of it, but most of the time I just moved the danger where I did not have to look at it." He turned back to her. "You, with your charts and questions, are forcing me to look again." Vera met his gaze. "I'm not doing it to hurt you," she said. "I'm doing it because the people who use your name are still hurting others." He nodded. "I know that now." She hesitated, then spoke her own truth. "I'm still afraid sometimes. Not of you exactly, but of what you represent. You could be a protector and a threat at the same time because of the world you hold. It is hard to know which side will show up. Alvaro absorbed that without flinching. You are not wrong, he said. All I can promise is that if I have to choose, I will choose the side that keeps Leah safe. And these days, that means choosing your side too. Their eyes held for a moment. No promises of perfection, only a shared understanding of the cost of change. Outside, the danger did not forget them. A few nights later, Vera left the building alone, insisting Raul did not need to assign a car every time. The air was cool and quiet. Traffic hummed in the distance. She walked toward the bus stop, clutching her bag. Halfway there, she noticed a dark sedan turning onto the street behind her. The engine slowed. The car stayed just far enough back to avoid suspicion, but close enough to keep pace. Her heartbeat quickened. She changed her route, crossing the street unexpectedly, moving past a row of small shops. The car turned again, following. Vera pulled out her phone and called Raul. "There is a car behind me," she said softly. "Dark. No plates on the front. It has turned with me twice." "Stay near people," Raul replied. "Do not go anywhere isolated. I am sending a driver now." She walked toward a busy corner store and stood under the bright light above the entrance. The sedan rolled past slowly, then picked up speed and disappeared around the next block. By the time the company driver arrived, her hands were trembling. "That was a reminder," Raul said later. "They want you to feel watched." "It worked," she admitted, "but I'm still here." He nodded, something like respect in his eyes. The final preparations for the manager's meeting took shape over the next 2 days. In a conference room, Alvaro and Vera went through the presentation slide by slide. She spoke through each section, explaining missing stock, shell structures, and timelines of deliveries. He listened, occasionally adjusting phrasing to make it sharper, but never softening the facts. "You are clear," he said at last. "You explain things in a way that cuts arguments off before they start." "I'm still worried," she admitted. "They do not want to hear that I have been inside their books." "That is why you must be the one to speak," he replied. "You are not one of the old guard. You have no debts to them. That makes you dangerous, but it also makes you believable." She took a breath and nodded. She understood. Her independence was both shield and target. The night before the meeting, she went to see Leah. The girl had insisted on a bedtime story, but halfway through, she set the book aside and looked up. "Is tomorrow the day?" Leah asked. "What day?" Vera asked, though she already knew. "The day the bad man from the diner is going to be told off," Leah said. Vera smiled faintly. "Yes, tomorrow is the day a lot of people will hear what he's been doing." "Will he shout at you?" Leah's eyes were wide. "He might try," Vera said, "but tomorrow he will be in a room where he cannot shout me down." Leah considered this, then settled back against her pillow. "Will you be careful?" she whispered. "I will," Vera promised. "And I will come back and tell you how it went." She smoothed Leah's hair, waited until her breathing slowed into sleep, then sat for a moment in the half-dark room, listening to the steady rhythm. Tomorrow, the truth would walk into a room full of people who had avoided it for years. And this time, it would not be turned away. The next morning dawned gray and heavy, the kind of weather that made the city feel tense even before the workday began. Vera arrived early, carrying a folder pressed close to her chest. Raul met her at the elevator, offered a short nod, and walked with her toward the executive conference room. Voices murmured inside. She recognized some of the tones, clipped, irritated, bored. A few managers laughed lightly, as if they were passing the time before another dull quarterly review. None of them had seen the presentation yet. None of them knew what was coming. Alvaro stood near the far wall, adjusting the cuff of his suit. He looked calm, but Vera noticed the tightness around his eyes. He gave her a small nod, the kind that carried both reassurance and expectation. The last to arrive was Antonio. He walked into the room with unearned confidence, chin lifted, suit pressed perfectly. He greeted a few managers with casual shoulder pats, as if reminding them of debts owed. When he reached his chair, he sat with a faint smirk. He believed the room still belonged to him. Alvaro stepped forward and the conversations halted. Chairs shifted, paper stilled. The usual hush of respect fell across the table. "Thank you all for coming," Alvaro said. Today is a standard review. Performance, expenditure, operations. We aim to clarify where improvements are needed. Some managers exchanged looks of mild disappointment. Others leaned back in their chairs, settling in for what they expected to be another predictable meeting. Then Alvaro continued, and to lead the analysis, he said, "I will turn the floor over to Vera Harvey." Several heads snapped toward her. A ripple of confusion and annoyance passed through the room. A few managers frowned, clearly offended that a former waitress was about to speak to them on matters they believed belonged only to upper leadership. Antonio's smirk faltered. Vera walked to the front. Her palms were damp, but her voice held steady when she spoke. "Good morning," she said. "I want to begin with a simple overview." She clicked the remote, and the first slide appeared. A clean graph showing rising costs against reported sales. "This is the average spending pattern across all locations," she continued. "These figures seem normal until you compare them with actual capacity. Certain outlets are ordering significantly more stock than they could ever sell." She clicked again. Red bars rose sharply. Blue bars stayed low. "Here," she said, "is the discrepancy." The room shifted. Chairs creaked. A few managers leaned forward now. She advanced to the next slide. "This cluster of locations shares the same purchasing signatures, the same inflated orders, and the same late-night deliveries. All of them were supervised in the past or currently influenced by one person." She paused. Antonio Crosby. The silence was absolute. Every gaze in the room snapped to Antonio. His mouth opened quickly. "This is ridiculous," he said, pushing himself to stand. "She is twisting numbers because I fired her. This is revenge dressed up as analysis. You cannot take her seriously. She is not even part of this industry." Vera waited, letting his outburst settle before she spoke. "I expected you to say that," she replied. "But I have more." She clicked again. The screen shifted to a split display. Inventory footage on one side, timestamp logs on the other. "These deliveries occurred at 2 in the morning, she said. Trucks not recorded in any official system. Staff were told to unload boxes and ignore the discrepancy. A few managers exchanged nervous glances. Antonio scoffed. "That proves nothing. Night deliveries happen. You know that." "They do," Vera agreed, "when scheduled and documented. But these were neither." She moved to the next slide. Shell company names appeared, linked by thin lines. "These accounts received payments from your outlets without explanation," she said. "They were registered under names that circle back to associates connected to you." Antonio's face reddened. Before he could argue again, Raul stepped forward. He set a stack of authenticated reports on the table. "These documents show exactly who accessed the old terminals used to create the forged spreadsheets and fake emails," he said. "The alterations came from machines assigned to Antonio's section." Gasps rose around the table. Antonio's smirk vanished entirely. "That is a lie," he snapped. "Those terminals are used by many people. Anyone could have." "No," Raul interrupted. "Every login was your ID, your timestamp, your access card." Antonio's breath caught. For the first time, he looked genuinely cornered. Vera continued, her voice steady. "You forged data. You built a network that siphoned money out of the company. And when you realized you were being investigated, you tried to frame me." Her gaze stayed on him, calm, unshaken. Antonio turned toward Alvaro, palms raised as if pleading. "You cannot believe her over me. I have worked for this group for years. I kept the outlets running. I did everything you asked." Alvaro held his silence for a moment. The weight of the room pulled toward him. Finally, he rose. "When you fired her," Alvaro said, "you did not know I was watching. You thought no one important was paying attention. That is how you treat people when you believe they are powerless." He walked around the table, each step measured. "You humiliated my daughter," he said. "You humiliated a child who was doing nothing wrong. And that same lack of restraint appears in your books, your ledgers, and your private dealings." Antonio shook his head. "I was protecting the restaurant's image." "No," Alvaro replied. "You were protecting your ego and your theft." Murmurs spread across the table. Managers who had once looked up to Antonio now leaned away. Alvaro stopped directly behind him. "There is no place for you in my future plans," he said. Security. 2 guards stepped inside the room. Antonio stumbled back, knocking his chair aside. "You cannot do this," he said, voice cracking. "You need me. None of this runs without me." Alvaro's expression did not change. "It runs better without you." The guards let Antonio out, along with 2 managers whose names had appeared repeatedly in Vera's charts. Their protests faded down the hall until the room was silent again. Alvaro returned to the head of the table. "We are finished accepting excuses," he said. "This company will not be run by fear, hidden deals, or private theft. From today onward, we begin a different kind of leadership." He gestured toward Vera. "She will oversee the compliance structure. Her reports will come directly to me. Anyone who interferes with her work will answer for it." A few managers nodded in visible relief. Others stiffened, knowing their own shortcuts would no longer be ignored. Vera closed her laptop slowly. Her hands were steady now. The shaking had stopped somewhere between the second slide and the moment Antonio was escorted out. The meeting ended with a new schedule of audits and restructuring. Chairs scraped the floor as people stood, discussing the changes in low voices. Some congratulated Vera with careful, polite phrases. Others avoided looking at her at all. When the room finally cleared, Vera stood alone for a moment. The air felt lighter, but the weight of what came next pressed quietly on her shoulders. Alvaro approached her. "You handled yourself well," he said. "Thank you," she replied. "But this was only the beginning." He nodded. "I know, and you will not face what comes next alone." She believed him, but as she stepped into the hallway, letting the door close behind her, she released a long breath she had been holding since morning. The first battle was over. The truth had won. Yet she knew the work ahead would be long, tangled, and filled with the shadows reform always disturbed. Still, she walked forward, because now everyone in that room understood one thing. The old rules were gone, and she was not backing down. The weeks that followed did not feel like victory. They felt like cleanup. Investigators arrived in careful waves, some official, some not. There were quiet meetings inside offices, sealed envelopes, and long nights spent with lawyers who knew how to translate the language of crime into the language of courts. Parts of Antonio's network broke quickly. 2 of his former allies chose to talk rather than face everything alone. They handed over records of side deals, names of suppliers, and proof of payments from rival groups. Others refused, disappearing from the city within days, leaving behind only empty apartments and disconnected numbers. Rivals who had once treated Galvin properties as open doors suddenly found them closed. With their inside man gone, routes dried up. Schedules changed. Security doubled. There were a few tense moments, a few cars lingering too long outside certain locations, but no open violence. Alvaro handled it through quiet calls and very clear boundaries. "We are finished doing business that way," he told one old contact over the phone. "Find another house to bleed." Inside Galvin Group, the change was even more visible. Several locations shut their doors with polite signs about renovations and restructuring. Behind those closed signs, Vera and Raul walked through kitchens, storerooms, and back offices, stripping systems down to their bones. Stock controls were rebuilt from the ground up. Cash handling rules changed. Staff roles were rewritten so fewer people could move things without oversight. At her desk, Vera drafted new policies that did not read like legal shields but like promises. Staff had the right to report irregularities without fear of retaliation. Managers could not unilaterally fire someone for questioning strange deliveries. Anonymous channels were established, routed directly to Raul and Vera, bypassing local supervisors who might try to bury complaints. "You really think they will trust this?" Raul asked her one evening, watching as she adjusted the wording of a clause about protection. "Not at first," she said. "But if we enforce it a few times, if people see that speaking up actually helps, they will start to believe it." He nodded, knowing she was right. The changes did not come without cost. Alvaro lost more than money. A handful of longtime associates stepped back, bristling at the new restrictions. They preferred the old system, where favors were traded in shadow and everyone earned a cut for keeping quiet. "You are cutting your own throat," One of them told him behind closed doors. You cannot hold this territory if you refuse to let people eat. I'm cutting out a disease, Alvaro answered. If that means fewer mouths at the table, so be it. He watched them walk away. There was no satisfaction in it. Only a calm acceptance that not everyone could follow where he now intended to go. Late at night, he sat alone more often, looking at balance sheets and security reports, thinking of the path that had brought him here. If he kept every deal, he could keep more power in the short term. But that world was the same world that had swallowed Leah's mother. The same world that had taught his daughter to flinch from loud voices and closed doors. He chose the other path. It was slower, less profitable, harder to explain to men who measured success in fear instead of stability. But it was a path he could imagine his daughter walking someday without having to look over her shoulder. For Vera, the external changes brought personal shifts too. Her salary now covered a small, bright apartment in a safer part of the city. She bought a second-hand sofa that did not sag and a proper desk by the window. The first thing she did was pay off the most pressing debts, then sent a larger transfer than usual to her mother, pretending it was a bonus for good performance. Her mother cried on the phone. You were always the stubborn one, she said. I knew it would pay off. Vera laughed softly and did not mention the parts of her job that would never fit in a polite conversation. She still visited her old neighborhood. Some evenings she stopped by the grocery store she used to rush through on the way home from late shifts. A few former coworkers from the diner spotted her on the street. Some hugged her and whispered thanks. They brought in new management, one server told her. No more screaming in the kitchen. It is different now. They say it started with you. Others barely nodded, their eyes cool. To them, she was the one who had risen out of the trenches into the boss's circle. It was easier for them to call it betrayal than to admit they might have made the same choice if given the chance. Vera accepted both reactions. She understood that people wrote their own stories to survive. The one person whose story changed the most was Leah. With the upheaval in the business came a strange, steady calm at home. Security was tighter, but routines became more predictable. There were fewer sudden trips, fewer late-night meetings. More evenings where Alvaro was actually present, sitting at the dinner table instead of taking calls in another room. Leah's drawings shifted slowly. Gone were the dark scribbles of faceless figures in doorways. In their place came scenes from the diner. A little girl at a booth. A woman with a ponytail bringing milkshakes. A tall man sitting across from them, shoulders relaxed. One afternoon, Leah handed Vera a new picture. The three of them sat together under a sign that said family in uneven letters. Is that what we are now? Vera asked, half teasing, half careful. Leah shrugged, a small smile tugging at her mouth. You are my guardian, she said. Papa said so. He did not use that word, but that is what you are. Vera blinked, caught off guard. Guardian, huh? Leah nodded, serious. You stayed when you did not have to. The words settled deep. Later that week, after another long day of planning audits and responding to legal updates, Vera and Alvaro found themselves on a balcony outside his office. The city lights stretched out beneath them in a scattered pattern, some windows glowing, others dark. For a while, they said nothing. The quiet felt earned. You know, Alvaro said finally, if you had walked away that day behind the diner, none of this would have happened. Vera watched the traffic moving far below. If you had not been watching, I would have just been another fired waitress looking for work. That is not what I mean, he said. If you had turned your head and let Antonio drag Leah out, my daughter would still be afraid of every raised voice. And my business would still be handing pieces of itself to men who wished me dead. He turned to her, his expression open in a way she had rarely seen. You changed the trajectory of my life, he said. Of hers. Of this entire group. Vera let the words sit for a moment before answering. I did not do it for your business, she said. I did it because a little girl was crying and no one else was willing to stand in front of her. He smiled faintly. I know. That is what makes it matter. She hesitated, then added, I stayed because of her too. The job came second. He nodded, accepting that without argument. Together they looked out over the city, neither pretending that everything was fixed, both knowing that something important had shifted. It became clear, after all the hearings and restructurings, that they needed to close the loop in a more personal way. The diner reopened under new management in early autumn. The chrome counters had been polished, the red booths reupholstered, but the bones of the place remained the same. The menu had some new items. The staff wore updated name tags. And near the entrance, framed behind glass, hung a new notice. Children are welcome. Staff have the right to challenge unfair treatment. The words were simple, direct. Anyone walking in could read them in a single glance. Vera stood on the sidewalk across the street for a moment, taking it in. Leah bounced beside her, pink ribbons in her pigtails. Alvaro stood slightly behind them, hands in his coat pockets, eyes scanning the street with old habits he did not quite turn off. "Ready?" Vera asked. Leah nodded and slipped her hand into Vera's. Inside, a few of the newer staff recognized Vera and smiled, not with fear, but with genuine warmth. One hostess whispered something to another, both glancing at the framed notice, then back at her with quiet gratitude. They took the same corner booth where everything had happened. The cushions had been replaced, but the angle of the light across the table was the same. The hum of conversation, the clatter of cutlery, the hiss from the kitchen, all familiar, yet altered. Leah climbed in beside Vera, immediately leaning against her side. A server brought milkshakes, and Leah laughed when the whipped cream almost tipped over the edge of the glass. Across from them, Alvaro sat with his usual precision. Dark suit, crisp shirt, tie knotted neatly. But his ring was simpler now, less showy, and the edge in his posture had softened. He watched his daughter and the woman beside her with a quiet expression that held both gratitude and something that looked like peace. For a long moment, Vera simply watched Leah laugh. The sound was clear, unafraid. The little girl who had once twisted napkins in her fists and stared at the floor now teased her father about taking too long to order. Vera remembered the first day she saw her. Alone at the same booth, eyes wet, shoulders tight, treated like a problem to be removed. A single choice had separated that day from this one. One decision to stand still when it would have been safer to step aside. A waitress had wrapped her arm around a crying child and told a manager he would have to fire her first. He had. And because of that, a criminal network had been forced to look at itself. An empire had shifted its balance. A father had chosen a different path. A frightened girl had found safety in the space between two adults who refused to let her be used. Vera took a sip of her drink and smiled as Leah nudged her for a taste of the whipped cream. The diner buzzed around them. Life went on, but in that corner booth, a new kind of family sat together. Proof that one moment in a noisy room, when someone decided to defend a child at the cost of their own security, could reach far beyond that single afternoon and reshape lives no one had planned to share.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.